Mic check 1 2 1 2. Mic check 1 2 1 2. If anybody can hear me in the chat, just push one. All right, thanks. Welcome back to the Black Brain Trust. This is Black Health Talk, episode 272. Please hit the like button as you come in, share the video if possible, hit that notification bell next to the subscribe button so that you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust as we post them on the community page, as well as our video uploads and our live streams. Tonight's topic is being Black with border personality disorder. So BPD is actually the initial term. Rosie Reyes, how are you doing? Good evening. As we discussed before, we are on the Zoom platform now. We've migrated from Hangouts last week, and it has been a success by our standards. So there was no bump in progress in business in stream continuity. So all right, what's going on, Dr. Phoenix? Let me bring up the docket. We only give wrenches to content creators. So content creators and contributors get wrenches and priority for wrenches. So that explains why you see certain people with wrenches. As to your question, can you get a wrench? At the moment, that has to be discussed first with the contributors to the Black Brain Trust. So we do have a council that goes to. We'll get started in a few seconds. Just bringing up the docket. All right, we're going to get started. So first item on the docket is, what is borderline personality disorder? Like any other disorder, from a mental health standpoint, and I am not a healthcare professional, so I'm reading off of this website, which is Medscape. A personality disorder, as defined in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, 5th edition, DSM-5, is an enduring pattern of inner experience and behavior that differs markedly from the expectations of the individual's culture, is pervasive and inflexible, has an onset in adolescence or early adulthood, is stable over time, and leads to distress or impairment. See prognosis and presentation. Although the most common etiologies for personality disorders are multifactorial, these conditions may be secondary to biologic, developmental, or genetic abnormalities. Sorry. Stressful situations may often result in decompensation, revealing a previously unrecognized personality disorder. So what's happening here is that the reason why we wanted to have this hangout, we've been talking about this for probably about a month or so, probably a couple months, and we suspect that this condition actually contributes to a lot of the failings and interactions that we see, not just in the manosphere, but outside of social media in most predominantly Black neighborhoods. So we wanted to actually do a deep dive into this, and we do have some healthcare professionals who have joined us in the past, who can actually speak to some of these things from their position, not as healthcare professionals, but based on their intellectual observations of these conditions. So let me get to the next item on the docket. All right, this one is from Medscapeagain.com. Borderline personality disorder, high risk for early death. Individuals with borderline personality disorder are at high risk for premature death from suicide as well as other causes. Although those who recover have less risk, new research suggests. Investigations follow almost 300 patients with BPD, borderline personality disorder, and 72 comparison patients who had other personality disorders. The participants who recruited during an inpatient hospital admission were allowed for 24 years and were followed for 24 years and were evaluated every other year. Let me see if I can get the whole entire yeah, so this is behind the paywall and I won't be able to actually it's not behind the paywall. It just wants us to register and I'm not going to register just to read this one snippet. But the main point to take away from this is that borderline personality disorder is high risk for early death based on the research that Medscape has done. So I'll read it again. Individuals with borderline personality disorder are at high risk for premature death from suicide as well as other causes, although those who recover have less risk, new research suggests. So this was in February of 2019. So this is this year that they're talking about this. Let me get to the next item on the docket. I'll share my screen as well. All right, this one is from Psychology Today. The social struggles of people with borderline personality disorder. New research shows how difficult social acceptance is in borderline personality. The people with borderline personality disorder are particularly sensitive to rejection, seems to be part and parcel of their psychological makeup. An insecure attachment style in which people constantly fear being abandoned or neglected is regarded as one of the most critical factors at play in leading to the instability and identity difficulties they face as adults. If you know someone who has borderline personality disorder, or at least some features of the disorder, you are acutely aware of how hard it is for this person to feel that the people close to them can be trusted. When you're out together, this person can become enraged if your attention wavers, or even worse, if you turn away completely and talk to other people. You need to look directly into this person's eyes when you're having a conversation, and you always have to be available should this person need to reach you. Failing to return a text can seem like the end of the world, quite literally precipitating a meltdown, if not an air meltdown. New research by Hindenburg University's Lisa Liebeck and colleagues, 2018, tested the theory that rather than being only sensitive to social rejection, people with borderline personality disorder are sensitive even to acceptance. Testing this counterintuitive notion, the German researchers proposed that people with this disorder process social information differently than people who do not have this disorder. And that's what leads to their inability to accept being accepted. The cognitive processes that they use to interpret social information biases them toward chronically feeling rejected, even when objectively the opposite is happening to them. Their reduced experience of social connectedness, in the words of the authors, means that they never feel included in situations when others are in fact reaching out to them as part of the group. You might, according to this view, make extra room at the table when these individuals come to join you at a restaurant, but instead of regarding your invitation as stemming from genuine liking toward them, they interpret the offer as form of rejection. They might, if this is the case, wonder why you didn't just wait for them to show up in the first place. So I just want to stop here and give my opinion real quick. Again, I'm not a medical professional, so please don't try to hold me to any standards of the medical industry. What we see in the manosphere is this very thing that they're describing. Certain people, especially of the opposite sex, feels that they are being rejected just by the fact that we have something called a manosphere. So they feel the need to become argumentative over topics that it may not even be talking about them, or may even invite them on to a panel, which leads to a meltdown if they don't feel that they're getting the attention that they deserve at the time that the attention is being given. We see this on certain panels every Sunday or any other time during the week, especially early in the week. Um, and you see these sort of meltdowns on panels with certain people. Even if the conversation is benign, it it seems to invoke and trigger those participants on these panels, which leads to a lot of unproductive conversation. To test the existence of this negative evaluation bias, the research team developed what they call the Mannheim Mannheim Virtual Group Interaction Paradigm, MVGIP, to create a realistic situation involving a computer simulation in which participants would feel either socially accepted or rejected by what they believe to be 6 other participants. The experiment involved a meet and greet phase in which the participants were introduced to avatars of these experimentally created other people, following by a rating task in which they evaluated the other people, phase 2, leading to the next occurrence in which they receive feedback about how the others like them, phase 3, in which phase 3, the manipulation involved acceptance or rejection, being told they were liked or being given negative ratings. So you see this on panels in the manosphere, this sort of phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. In phase 1, in which participants were introduced to avatars, right? Everybody in Black YouTube has these avatars up, especially if they if it's of themselves, they have their avatars up. So that's the first phase. And then the second phase is um, uh, sorry, The second phase is basically followed by a rating task in which they evaluated the other people. So you see this sort of thing on panels where people come on and they feel the need to correct the enunciation of words or look at a person's avatar and critique that person's avatar based on the looks in the avatar or the cadence of that person or the way the person speaks. If it doesn't have Negro dialect, it's considered to be white, and therefore there's a necessity to reject that person. And again, it leads into the next occurrence, which is phase 3, in which they receive feedback about how how the others like them, and the manipulation involved acceptance or rejection. So you see this on panels a lot. Go on to the next paragraph. In the next part of the experiment, the participants played a trust game in which they were led to believe that they were playing with new people. This is very common in the Manosphere. Some people change their names and come on with different avatars and so on and so forth, who they could either compete with or cooperate with within a simulated money investment task where joint strategies determine individual payoffs. The first co-player, the trustee, again a simulated player, would first show cooperation, then break that bond of trust by not cooperating, and then finally go back to being cooperative, appearing to restore the initial trust. The second co-player, a provocateur, was introduced to induce antisocial behavior, anger, and rage on the part of the real participant. The idea was that when the individuals with borderline personality disorder felt betrayed by the trustee, this betrayal would turn into rage toward the provocateur, measured by taking money away in the investment task, when in reality, the second co-player had done nothing to deserve such wrath. Again, you go on certain panels and you see this sort of behavior um, as the co-players mentioned in the paragraph. So I'll read that the co-players again. So the first co-player, the trustee, would first show cooperation, then break that bond of trust by not cooperating, and then finally go back to being cooperative, appearing to restore the initial trust. And then the second player, a provocateur, was introduced to induce antisocial behavior, anger, and rage. So again, we see this sort of anger and rage and ebb and flow on panels discussions. If you don't agree with the sentiments of consciousness of pro-black, then the rage comes out. Now you're a bad person. You're a coon. You're a sellout. So on and so forth. And again, I want to put more emphasis behind the last part of the paragraph that discusses this betrayal would turn into rage toward the provocateur, when in reality, that second co-player had done nothing to deserve such wrath. Again, we see this a lot in the recent days and recent weeks of certain content creators um, invoking wrath against a certain individual who may not have anything to do with what's going on. All right, let me move on to the next paragraph. This complex experimental procedure could guarantee that the behavior of the people with borderline personality disorder could be observed in real time and compared, though the manipulation of the conditions of the simulated game with people who did not have borderline personality disorder. The measures used to test the social acceptance bias hypothesis included expectations of acceptance or rejection. positive or negative ratings from the co-players. Emotional responses to acceptance or rejection behavior toward the trustee in the cooperation betrayal game, and punitive behavior to the provocateur measured in the form of taking money away. So that last paragraph, last part of the paragraph is actually key, because what we see is if you do not cooperate in by that person's standards, then what happens here is your channel gets flagged, or you get a thumbs down at best, or your channel gets terminated, or someone gets another person, manipulates another person, which is the manipulation part of this condition, manipulates another person to flag another person's channel down. The participants consisted of 56 female patients with borderline personality disorder, matched by age and education with typical controls. As the authors expected, the borderline personality group had a higher anticipation of rejection than did the healthy controls. The patients also became angrier after rejection than the healthy controls, but they also became angry even after the task led them to feel accepted. The trust game produced results that further supported the idea of a negative social inclusion bias in people with borderline personality disorder. When given the opportunity to invest in a cooperative fashion with their co-player, the borderline individuals exposed to the acceptance condition were less likely to exhibit this pro-social type approach, or in the words of the authors, suggesting a disadvantageous effect of positive social encounters on subsequent interactions in borderline personality disorder, BPD, sorry. Even when those subsequent interactions were with total strangers. So again, we do see this in the Manosphere. We see people become angry when being invited to the group. So there's some form of disgruntledness on their behalf, even when it's benign. What was so striking about these results is that during the cooperative phase of the trust game, participants were led to believe that they were sharing profits in a 50-50 fashion with their co-player. That those with borderline personality disorder perceived this behavior negatively might, according to the authors, be due to the fact that they didn't regard this equal split as fair. Those borderline personality disorders patients might need their partners to offer up a larger share in order to feel that they are truly being treated in an equitable fashion. Even more odd, the break of cooperation and subsequent efforts by the co-player to make up did not produce any differences between the borderline and the healthy participants. As the author notes, this suggests that patients with BPD are well able to forgive their social partner for disruptions in cooperation and reestablish cooperative behavior over a course of multiple interactions when the first step is made by the patient's interaction partner. Given this desire to reestablish positive relations, the additional findings that individuals with BPD and healthy controls reacted similarly to the provocateur when then appears to make sense. So again, this study actually started off with females, 56 of them. So I want to put that, put emphasis behind that. And to add to this, my opinion on this is that when the person who is suffering from BPD uh, feels that their partner should offer up a larger share in equity. So what happens here is a wrench may not be enough for the person. They may feel that you need to come on to, they need to be a part of the panels, or um, they may need to sign a contract for that matter. Um, More manipulation involved from the person suffering with the BPD. May need to offer up a contract and make the other person sign on and give up something such as cooch, vagina, etc. Share their bodies with them. With this experimental method, the German authors were able to show that in a completely standardized social situation where the only features that change were under experimental control, people with BPD have low expectations of their social partners, that they cannot adjust upward when other people seem to show interest or concern in them. What's more, being treated well by their interaction partners leads the BPD individuals to become suspicious of people not involved with that interaction who, in fact, are behaving fairly towards them. So again, you see this in the Manosphere. You may come on to a chat and say peace to the chat or good evening to everyone, and if that person does not feel, the person with the BPD does not feel that they were addressed personally, you at them in the chat, they feel that they may have been slighted, or that you're less trustworthy, that you're suspicious. All right, to sum up, the mismatch of expectations and experiences that seems to characterize people with borderline personality disorder seems to be one that can only further aggravate their suspicions that the people they have relationships with don't truly care. In your relationship with these individuals, it would seem that the only way to ensure harmony is to keep in mind that acceptance alone isn't enough to smooth the rough waters that can face you and your partner. Apart from whatever therapeutic interventions might be involved, focusing on the expectations, not just the experiences, would seem to be key to ensuring stable and fulfilling interactions. So again, um, if you don't buy into the matriarchy, if you don't buy into the gynocracy, you are a bad person. You are inherently bad and not trustworthy and seen as suspicious. Even if their response is that there's no such thing as a matriarchy or gynocracy in the Black community, this actually would disagree with them on that. All right. I see some people in the queue. Let me promote them to the panel. What's going on, Paul Bryant? You can unmute your mics when you're ready.
Good evening.
Hey, what's going on, bro?
How are you, sir?
I'm hanging in there, man.
I think this is a good topic, and it's very interesting given a conversation that I heard last night or 2 or 3 days ago. You know, um, the lack of interpersonal skills and the lack of emotional self control. So, you know, in addiction, it is said that excuse me, the first step is to admit. You must
Hmm.
first admit that there is in fact a problem. Okay, so when one looks at Black America in
Hmm.
general, um, there is failure to admit that there is a problem, and that problem being that mindsets must change.
Mhm.
So any person who espouses or thinks differently than the generally accepted narratives, because you're black, you must think a certain way, you must be pro-black, or you must be this way, or you must support this, you must speak a certain way, carry yourself a certain way, you must live in a certain environment. You must obtain excuse me, you must pursue certain agendas in life. And if you dare to even think differently, you are met with disdain, with resistance, you are attacked, regardless of the merits of your thought processes or the things that you are saying. People often will resort to personal attacks or seek to, in some way lessen the validity of what you're saying.
Mhm.
Never, never looking at the validity of what it is that you are in fact saying. So again, you see this, you see the behavior, everything that you referenced in this article, and how you consistently referred it back to things that you see in this Black area YouTube, and also just Black America in general, because human nature reflects itself in every area of human endeavor. Okay, so you know, one would then posit, based on what what you just covered in this article,
Mhm.
that there are a lot of people who exhibit many of the traits that were just covered. So based on that, I'd be very interested to see where tonight's discussion goes, because this is a topic that absolutely needs to be spoken about.
Mhm. Reigning woman, how are you doing? You can unmute your mic.
Rainy
Your
woman,
mic
good
is
evening.
very low.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can. There's a lot of background noise though.
Okay, well, this must be the echo in my office. Mm, I can try to get that on the phone. But this is a very important topic, and I'm really glad to see you cover this on tonight, because I believe that going through this, we can actually see how probably a lot of people around us, different family members, relationships, friendships, currently and even in the past, may have had some signs or some symptoms or possibly still going on mental illness or disorder in some sort of way. So
Mhm. Mhm. All right, let me get to this next article. All right, this one is from Yahoo. How borderline personality disorder affects relationships. One hallmark of borderline personality disorder is interpersonal hypersensitivity, which is a technical way of saying that many borderline personality disorder patients have trouble being in healthy, secure, and mutually beneficial relationships with others. According to the Journal of Personality Disorder, BPD, patients have intense needs for closeness and attention, but at the same time, they also possess equally intense fears of rejection and abandonment. That can make forming and maintaining close bonds, romantic, platonic, or professional, extremely difficult for someone with BPD. It can also be extremely hard on husbands, wives, friends, family members, and other loved ones. There is often a sense of frustration and helplessness on both sides of the equation. Brandon Unruh, MD, assistant medical director at the Harvard affiliated McLean Hospitals Gunderson residents. I'm very familiar with this hospital, and it's in my city. A program for women with severe personality disorders, tells Health. It's important that we work with everyone involved to help them understand each other and understand this disease better. Here are some ways BPD can wreak havoc on relationships and what patients and their loved ones can do about it. Almost everyone who suffers from this disease will have difficulties holding on to relationships. Anna Murari, MD, Associate Professor of Clinical Psychiatry at Will Cornell Medical College in New York City, tells Health. They are extra sensitive to rejection, and they perceive rejection when even when it's not intended. People with BPD may scrutinize every detail of a conversation or an interaction, and they believe they can pick up on very subtle emotional cues. They pay a lot of attention on how to treat people, or how people treat them, and they take other people's behavior very personally as an attempt to control the environment around them, says Dr. Murari. Their goal is to avoid feeling the state of emptiness or anger or despair they perceive if they feel rejected. So we see this a lot in the Black Manosphere. Um, what we see is people feeling that if they are not allowed on a panel, or if you don't buy into the social cues within Black society, that somehow, some way, you're rejecting them. You're not buying into the matriarchy. You're not buying into to a gynocracy. Um, they're reading your cue, your body language, and they're saying, this person is uppity. They're bougie. They're boule. They use all these sort of terms to identify people that they don't even know.
Mike, it's funny how that. Well, you know what? I'm sorry. Are you done, or are you still reading? Sorry.
No, let me just finish these last couple of
Okay.
paragraphs, and then we'll go over it. People with BPD are looking to their relationships to be the answer to all of their interpersonal and emotional needs, says Dr. Unruh. They need to look for perfect relationships, he adds, and their expectations often don't match up so much with those of the average person. So again, the educated lame um, doesn't measure up, doesn't match up to what they consider, for the average person. And so they put this person into a category, put them in the box of purgatory, and therefore the relationship never ever advances. You see this in Black society and relationships. This naturally creates a lot of friction and frustration when their hopes don't match up with the expectation of others in this person's world, he continues. This can lead to burnout, anger, confusion, misunderstanding on the part of family members or partners. Some of the stigma around this disease is that people with BPD are just manipulative or just selfishly trying to get attention, Dr. Umar says. But we view this quite differently in this field. We understand that this is a symptom of an illness, and people are doing the best they can to get their emotional relationship needs met. So again, flying cross country, having you know uh, relationships with other YouTubers, and getting pregnant, and then calling them all types of dusty this and dusty that, when their expectations are not met. It's normal for couples to fight, but when one person in a relationship has BPD, a simple argument can trigger an emotional downward spiral. Partners often learn that the hard way, says Dr. Mirari, which leads to them which leads them to feel like they are walking on eggshells and can't discuss serious issues without experiencing a major conflict. They they may even be worried that their partner will harm themselves. Um, This is quite noticeable in the manosphere. You're not allowed to talk about certain topics if certain people are on the panel or if they have certain subscribers, because you're walking on eggshells. We usually call these sort of men simps. That's why it's important for the partners and loved ones to be involved with a patient's treatment so they can learn how to react in certain situations. They can also encourage skills learned in treatment that can help patients regulate their emotions and respond appropriately. Assisting a loved one with seeking treatment can help you both better understand your own needs as well. You want to avoid being involved with someone with BPD who makes you feel completely responsible for their emotional state. Again, the weight of the black community is always the burden of the black community is always put on men that the community has never helped, nor do they have any respect for it, but the burden is often put on them. You often see, I read a statistic about it a couple of years ago, I think 2016 or something like that. Black men are more likely to rear children that are not biologically theirs. So, in other words, I think the CDC had put this out. So, in other words, black men are taking on the burden of someone else's children, despite the fact that it's not biologically theirs. And there's no gratitude for it because uh, the patient doesn't seem to think that you know there's a necessity to actually thank or be thankful, because that's the manipulation aspect of it. No, isn't your mother black, right? All right, let me read this last one. They can go from hot to cold. People with BPD have a tendency to view people and themselves in very black or white terms, says Dr. Marari. They tend to idolize people in certain situations and then devalue them very quickly. That makes it hard for them to stick with not only one romantic partners, but also career choices in friend groups. Friend groups would be different sort of channels in the manosphere. Living with a person who sees you one way one day and another way the next day is extremely difficult. So that's the hot and cold aspect. Um, one day you're conversing with somebody on the panel and you're having a good discussion, and the next day they're lunging at you on some other stuff. But I also want to put emphasis on the quote. They tend to idolize people in certain situations and then devalue them very quickly. So it doesn't take much for you to be devalued if you do not agree with the status quo, which is that of a gynocracy or a matriarchy. Constantly needing to be on good terms with them on that level, and until you disagree with them, now you are devalued. Go ahead, Paul Bryant, if you want to jump in.
Well, for one thing, personally, this is just me personally. I would say that extends to Black American society as a whole, not just a matriarchy or a gynocracy. Really, that really extends to Black American society as a whole.
Mhm.
So the constant arguing and the fighting, everything has to be one way. The monolith of thought. No group on earth has ever been monolithic in thought. So for some reason, you now have this mindset
Mhm.
that says black people have to be monolithic in thought, and anyone who thinks any differently, they get attacked
Mhm.
because they do not follow that narrative. They do not follow that mindset. And you tend to see those individuals who are the most the most the most vocal, that people must be a strict adherent to these mindsets. they tend to be the ones who, as it says, they run hot and cold. One day they like you, the next day they hate you.
Mhm.
So as I always say, all is mental because mental is supreme. The first step is to admit there is a problem. This is why I consistently beat that dead horse.
Mhm.
Mindsets need to change. And even
Mhm.
those who say, well, I have the solution. Here's the idea. Black people have to do this and black people have to do that.
Mhm.
You tend to see the same monolithic ideas in thinking. And if one studies their history,
Mhm.
they are the same ideas that have been thrown about for decades. They haven't worked, so why not just do something different? So what I'm saying is any line of thinking that runs in any way different, not even counter, just different. If you do not share the same mentality or narrative as the larger Black American society, you are vilified and attacked.
If you're married to a non-black woman, you are very much under attack.
Absolutely. And I call to, we've talked many times. Look at Robert F. Smith.
Mhm.
You know, he wears how whatever you not you sorry, but whatever may be thought about Robert F. Smith, that man was attacked and vilified because he's not married to a black woman. Amazing. And
Mhm.
look at what that man accomplished.
Mhm.
You know,
Right,
and right.
right, and I think the culture has been cultivated, so to speak, based on these very conditions. And
Hmm.
now, what happens here, it for me, based on my observation of these articles, is that it's no longer a disease, but it's also a legacy that is being handed down. Um, I was
Exactly.
watching a video um, on CNN, and I think Anderson Cooper, they were talking about interracial marriage in the black community.
Mm.
And one of the black females said that I'm okay with black women dating out and marrying out, but I'm not okay with black men doing it. And I think Anderson Cooper, and I think Anderson Cooper said, that's not fair. And she just shrugged her shoulders and said, it is what it is. Um, the video clip's on YouTube. I have to find it. I wish I would have found it for this hangout. But
Right.
she the amount of emphasis that she saw when they showed her these images of like Meghan Markle with Prince Harry, there was a lot of joy and there was a lot of glee. But when it was black men, it was a different reaction. It was very hot and cold, like the article had stated.
Right. Now, again, as I just said, per, personally, I don't put it wider. I don't put it only on black women. Me personally, my mindset is it's wider. It's men and women. I agree totally with what you just said, totally. But epigenetics is very real, and that is a very real, consistent science. So over time, mentalities they become part of you, bio bioenergetically. So mindsets are actually passed down from generation to generation to generation. So we're actually seeing how those mindsets are passed down. So you know the as you said, it's like the first step is to admit. So Black America, I've always said they're addicted, and they are addicted to the victim mentality. So in a polite society, you do not blame the victim, and victims never take any accountability for their thoughts, words, or actions, and that is also a huge major problem amongst Black American people.
Which becomes cyclical.
Absolutely. Which brings us back to what the epigenetics. It's cyclical, it's self-perpetuating, it
Mhm.
is passed down from generation to generation to generation. So now, since the majority of Black people tend to occupy the lower end of the socioeconomic strata,
Mhm.
you tend to see the age, the age gap between parent and child lessening. So you have a lot of teenage mothers. So when we're talking generation to generation to generation, we're no longer talking 50 to 60 to 70 years between three generations. We're literally talking 30 to 40 years between generations, if I'm making sense.
Absolutely. Reigning woman, do you have anything you want to add to this? Oh, I think she got off the panel. All right. On the all right, this one's from the fader.com. On the realities of being a Black woman with borderline personality disorder. An excerpt from Do What You Want, a new UK zine about mental health. Interesting image. On April 28th, the World of DIY Publishing will get a stellar new addition to. All right, I never seen my mother cry. When I was younger, I came to the conclusion that she was old. But with time, I realized this simply wasn't true. I knew I know my mother is emotional. I've seen her joyful, I've seen her furious, I've seen her excited and scared and even sad. I've just never seen her cry. I later grew up to understand that we live in a world that doesn't grant Black women vulnerability, and that Black women everywhere suffer for immeasur- for it immeasurably. It is for this exact reason that I couldn't admit to myself that I was ill for a very long time. I associated vulnerability with weakness. And as a Ghanaian American writer, Maria Nana Ama Dankwa writes in her memoir, Willow Weep, Willow Weep for Me, a Black woman's journey through depression. Weakness in Black women is intolerable. In a way, that's what made my borderline personality disorder even more terrifying diagnosis. Emotional instability is not in the Black girl repertoire, really. Borderline personality disorder, or BPD, is characterized by unstable emotions in relationships, impulsivity, self-harming behavior, and disturbed thought process. BPD has always been a complex and controversial diagnosis amongst clinicians. Some, like my older psychiatrist, even refuse to refer to it as a mental illness and instead acknowledge it as only as a series of maladaptive behavioral patterns. These people, regardless of who they are terribly misinformed. Unlike anxiety or depression, it is not easy. It is not so easy to pinpoint any exact things I do or think and attribute them to having BPD. It influences every aspect of my life and my reality. It affects all of my actions, interactions, and relationships. It also means I spend a lot of time worrying about how I can never separate myself from it. What parts of my personality are me as an individual, and what parts are just a pathology? Are they one? Are they one and the same? When your identity is constructed around this illness, you can't help but ask yourself, who am I without it? For a long time, I thought a personality disorder was a life sentence, when in fact, many BPD patients achieve either full or partial remission within 10 years. Sometimes that feels too long to keep pushing for. At other times, it gives me something to strive towards. While it's been clear to me that I've had BPD since the age of 15, I only pushed for an official diagnosis a year ago when I was positive that I had a physical and mental energy to confidently discuss and advocate for my own health. I already knew from my I already knew from the experiences or friends sorry, and the experiences of friends and family that maneuvering the mental health system as a Black woman was tough. You are gaslighted, patronized, ignored, or just completely forgotten about. But still, I naively anticipated that the aftermath of my official diagnosis would bring a wave of relief, comfort, and reassurance. I eagerly awaited the peace of mind. It never came. So this is a pretty long article. I'm not going to read all of it because I think we get the gist. If you want to read it, it will be in the docket after the video ends, after the live stream ends. But this is interesting. Rainy Woman, do you have anything you want to offer this if you're still on the panel?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
You sound really far away.
Is it better if I speak up, if I speak louder?
Is it possible for you to physically move closer to your microphone or go into a smaller room or use a pair of headphones?
What you can do is you can call into the line too. There's a dial-in number that you can dial in.
Let me do that, okay? Let me do that.
Interesting. We got a thumbs down.
Yeah, well, it is what it is, you know. Maybe one too many car talks where we spoke bad about Ford and the Ford F-150, you know, with a lift kit on it, you know.
Mhm.
But be that as it may, getting back on topic, I am not a Black woman, so far be it for me to expound on that particular topic. You know, I really don't. I also really would not want to add much more to what you just said. You know, so
Mhm. We'll give Rainy Woman a few seconds to call back in.
absolutely.
Yeah.
One thing though, while she is saying that though, I would like to speak. I would like to speak on something.
Mhm.
We've talked about mindsets and how if you do not espouse or follow the narratives of the Black American society as a wider whole, because I have noticed any Black person, as we just said, any Black person who tends to come from higher up or from the middle or higher up the socioeconomic strata, they tend not to espouse many of the traditional Black American narratives. So there seems to be, again, they get attacked
Mhm.
for not espousing those narratives,
Mhm.
as if, and the wider Black American narrative seems to be that, again, everything is one way and everything is white America's fault, and you have to be the victim, and it's all about whitey this and whitey that, and anyone who does not espouse that mindset, or did,
Mhm.
or whose experience was in any way different, somehow not acknowledging they're not acknowledging prejudice, or they're not following their reality. They don't understand what's going on. Everything that you and I literally just spoke on 5 minutes ago, and we continuously speak on. You know,
Mhm.
no one is denying the history. No one is denying reality. But for some reason, any Black person who does not basically toe that party line, they get vilified, they
Mhm.
get attacked. And it's also a refusal to even entertain the thought that there may in fact be other ways of thinking other than that Black American party line.
Let me read this one paragraph here. Sometimes I'm aware of my illness being almost political. The anguish and suffering of Black women is fetishized only when it's in sacrifice. Historically, the value of Black womanhood has rested on our ability to endure pain in silence. Black women are martyred for their ability to silently withstand the violence and injustice enacted upon them. Apparently, it is what makes us divine. The harm this does to the mental health of Black girls everywhere is traumatic. I have to push back against this. Based on Dr. Tommy Curry's book, The Man Not, as well as Dr. James Morton's coverage of Black males over the last maybe 10 to 15 years, this is not true. This is this is projection. Um, we know this is the opposite for Black females, as the community is run by women. 80% of the households are run by women. So when they say things like this is a part of the issue. Um, the denying and making up false history. There's a video on YouTube from Pink Elephant back in 2009, and it's called "Making Up Fake History," and he's talking about Black females who make these exact statements, make up history as they go along. Shout out to Pink Elephant from the original Manosphere. He talked about this extensively. Um, I'm not sure why they do this, but I guess this is a part of the condition, though. Reigning women, please jump in. You can unmute your mic
Okay, can you hear me better now?
clearly.
Okay, awesome. So, peace and respect to everyone on the panel and in the chat. So, to chime in on the article you were reading about Black women and BPD or mental illness in general, I wanted to comment on the part where a woman being vulnerable, especially Black women being vulnerable, is seen as a weakness. And how, from my experience, from what I hear a lot is, instead of the opposite sex really trying to understand women's emotions,
Mhm.
um, women are attacked for being emotional. And so and also having taken on so many more responsibilities over the course of time versus when our great grandparents and grandparents and so on and so forth were growing up, being more of breadwinners, being more viable in workforces and so all these kinds of things also playing a role on the instability or some of the warpedness, the out of the wackiness of women's emotions. And so it doesn't help when we're already feeling like we have to be so strong and you're told to be so strong and it's been for so many years it's been pressed upon as being a good thing to be a strong-willed woman or to be a strong force and not being able to balance it out or not being able to rely on your emotions has definitely been a major contributing factor in the breakdown and the further instability of women and the inability to sometimes relate to others and overcome. And because no one wants to be seen as quote unquote crazy, right? No one really wants to go, and get checked. But mental health is a part of all of our well being, it's a part of everyone's health, men and women. You know what I'm saying? And so for women, though, to be looked upon as weak when we show our vulnerability or not knowing when or how to show the vulnerability, it only further leaves it leaves a path. It lays a path for mental illness to actually be set in because you're not addressing things.
Mhm.
And women need to address things.
Mhm. And that's why I think it's actually important for Black women to have their own channels to actually say what they what needs to be said. All right, this is from Fomelang Congo. Interesting. I think this is African. All right, living with BPD as a Black man. So I have been contemplating writing this post for some time now, but I have always stopped myself because of my fear of abandonment. You'll come to learn as you read that this is a common symptom sign of BPD. This fear honestly stems from all of the internalized words I have heard before when I have wanted to be vocal about what is going on with me. Hearing things such as you're using your mental illness as a means of justifying being shitty towards others can definitely cause one to feel some type of way, especially disclosing to others. However, it's a new year. People are starting to have the conversations that need to be had around the topic of mental health. We won't go into what BPD is. I came about my diagnosis in December of 2015 after I had an episode, which is when I decided I decided I needed to go see someone and get help. Look, to tell you the truth, I always known since 2012 when I had been seeing a psychologist in Cape Town who told me that she suspected I had BPD after our sessions were up. I had been seeing her to help me deal with the loss of my mother, who passed on after a battle with cancer in 2011. Since leaving therapy, I had always ran away from the label of BPD, even though I would read up on it and notice some of the symptoms. The now is such a real thing. The fact that there were not many Black people that I knew who had BPD or I could speak to about it. Mental health was not talked about amongst my peers, much like the older generation. However, how does one even begin to understand themselves and find support on this journey? One symptom that stood out with me was the anger I had issues controlling, and I often lashed out at close ones, and it usually wasn't warranted. However, having kept things bottled up with those close to me could have done or said earlier would result in me lashing out later. The problem is that I couldn't explain to them what was going on because I didn't understand it myself. How do you support someone when you don't know what they have or understand it? This was before I started with a dialectical behavioral therapy. Fast forward to 2017, and it was the first time in a long time I felt in control of my emotions, or at least aware a bit. And even though I had some episodes, these were always induced by liquor, which had become a buddy to help with social anxiety, which I used to never experience, as I was always in the mood to party in my early 20s. This, this changes as one grows older. Emotions become more intense, and adult problems contribute to the stress of it all. But with research, I'm sorry, but with my research, I have come to learn that there are always ways in which one can manage borderline personality disorder, which is DBT. I started DBT early 2017 where I was being coached on mindfulness, the practice of being fully aware and present in this one moment, distress tolerance, how to tolerate pain in different difficult situations, not change it, interpersonal effectiveness, how to ask for what you want and say no while maintaining self-respect and relationship with others. Emotion regulation, how to change emotions that you want to change. The goal of DBT is to help people build a life that they experience as worth living. In DBT, the person and therapist work together to set goals that are meaningful to them. For example, with my therapist, she always want me to name the feeling and try, should I say try to, and try to find out what made me feel that way and whether I could change it or not. Something as simple as someone not responding on time to our text can send us on a roller coaster of paranoia where we start asking ourselves whether we did something to you or not. Did I say something wrong, offensive in that text? The fear of abandonment is very real. And even not being included in plans can set us into a spiral where we relive all the episodes where all the episodes we've had around you and think we're being ostracized. It's difficult for being black and trying to explain what is going on with you when your community does not even try to understand mental health, let alone even do a little research about what could be affecting a close one after they disclose to them. Well, some. One cannot deny the fact that everyone has problems to deal with and it's difficult to support someone when you yourself are not okay, and that would be unfair on anyone. When it comes to understanding BPD, one needs to speak to whoever they know who has BPD about their triggers, as these can be different from each individual. However, they stem from the same symptoms. The one thing we're asking for is empathy and understanding that we're trying and we need support. There's definitely a lot I have to say on BPD, which is why I should say I will be running a series of articles, but I do implore you to read more of it, understand it, and educate. So we've heard from black women, we've heard from black men now. What's your take on this, Paul?
Well, my take on it is this: that in Black American culture, Black American society,
Mhm.
mental health is something that is absolutely not talked about. It is swept under the rug. It doesn't happen. You do not talk about it. You do not have it. So many people, they just don't know how to cope. So, you know, Black people, men and women, and the youth need help and can definitely benefit from therapy. Therapy is an absolute good thing, and it does not make you weak to admit that you need help. It takes strength to admit that you need help. That's not a weakness. That is a strength. So funny that we're talking about strength because more women seek the help of therapy much more so than men because men are always taught I'm a man and I have to be strong and I have to be stoic and I never need help and to admit help is weakness. No, it takes strength to admit that you need help. So this is definitely a topic that is very, very, very taboo amongst American Black people, and many more Black people would definitely stand to benefit from therapy because mental health issues are something that are so untalked about that they are unrecognized and undiagnosed. So I absolutely applaud this man for writing this article. And I would absolutely implore anyone listening to this stream reach out to a therapist, and you may find yourself surprised how much therapy can help.
Mhm. Rainy woman, do you have anything you want to add to this?
Yes. So I also want to co-sign what Paul Bryant said about it really being looked upon as for men, as a weakness because you're supposed to be, stoic and supposed to be brave and able to handle and tackle any and everything. But it goes back to what I said before that mental health is a part of every last single one of us as human beings. Well, and not even, mental health, mental health is a part of every being, every living being. But with us being humans, for some reason, we tend to want to think or put on this thing, this stigma that everyone besides us
has to be this strong, resilient force. And to not be this strong, resilient, unbreakable force makes you less than. But like Paul said, it takes a strong person to say that, you know what, today's not a good day, or I'm not well, and to get help. You know, we all encounter different things on our journey of life that can break us down at different times. The thing that might break me down today may not ever break you down, but it could be something else that could break you down that may not ever break me down.
Mhm.
And this is why it's important for us to also build healthy relationships, really really have discussions about who we are as people, not who we are just about, with our careers or where we were born and raised, but no, who are you? Who am I? And not having these kind of discussions also is part of the breakdown and part of the continuation of dysfunctional relationships, dysfunctional friendships. It's part of the rage, part of the uncharted rage of men. And these days, women.
Mhm. All right, let me get to this next article. This one's from the Huffington Post. How my all black wardrobe helps me through borderline personality disorder. Interesting. They show these three black women up there, or it might be all the same woman. Yeah, I think it's all the same. All right. For as long as I can remember, I had never had a strong idea of who I am. Though there are a few consistencies. Paramore is my favorite band. Beyonce is my queen. I hold zero tolerance for all isms and phobias. And other things such as my hobbies, music taste, favorite food, and diet have always been pretty fluid and dependent on who I was with at the time. I guess I always knew that the other people didn't necessarily get as influenced by others to the same degree that I did, but mirroring the behavior of others after time together is normal. So I thought nothing of it. It wasn't until I got diagnosed with borderline personality disorder that I began to re-question these facets of myself. BPD is, as you might guess, a personality disorder. It is a broad diagnosis, but is typically characterized by unstable relationships with other people, unstable emotions, unstable sense of self and other, and the inability to function. People with BPD tend to have other mental health conditions or behavioral issues such as depression, eating disorder, disassociation, or impulsivity, all of which contribute to the misdiagnosis of individuals and the stigma behind the disorder. When I found out one of the core characteristics of BPD is that unstable sense of self and self image, I started realizing that the true reason for my fluctuation in identity, personality, and even my opinions. Just look at my education. For 2 years, I studied nursing with plans to convert to medicine before what I one day woke up and switched programs to psychology. And now I'm applying to university again, looking to study journalism or film and theater. Interesting. It is not a case of faking who you are. Whenever I was with someone new, I would generally live in the new version of myself. I would feel everything as if it were my original thought. For 2 years, I was convinced that I wanted children. It wasn't until things ended with the person I was intimate with that it dawned on me that actually I hate children. It sounds absurd, right? How can someone shift so significantly? Well, we really don't know. There's limited research in the area and scientists are still trying to figure that out. Nevertheless, the only way I've made sense of it for me is by thinking about a bowl of water. It can't magically transform into a bowl of rock, much like I much like how I can't change into a completely new person. It can, however, freeze. liquefy, or turn into a gas, depending on the environment. Okay. In much the same way, a person with BPD will often change their habits, parents, or mannerisms depending on who they are with. Of course, identity issues are not exclusive to those with BPD. Everyone changes to some degree in different social contexts, but in person like myself, the change is more profound. This is a picture of her with her friends. Since getting my diagnosis, I have been making an active effort to discover new things about myself, whereas before I just went with the flow and allowed myself to be swept away with by every stimulus. I moved away from home to give myself the chance to explore my identity without the influence or preconceived notions people had about me. And I follow this by looking at my relationship with fashion. All of our personal fashion choices are continually evolving in line with trends, seasons, or personalities and lifestyle after all. As we get older, other influences come to play, such as changing times, the industry we work in, our age, or even social or cultural group. Because of this, fashion ultimately plays a critical role in our self identity and confidence. It is a legitimate and powerful form of self expression. Our appearance can visually vocalize multiple overlapping identities such as race, gender, sexuality, and even our personal interests. Our style is even often a political statement. In my case, I have always felt the need to have a look, but with uh, personal style being tied so closely to identity, my inspiration would always be drawn from the people around me. In the same way, my personality would shift. So would my wardrobe. In my Premier League days, it'd be athletic and gym wear. When dating a hipster, I mimic their use of rings and hats. Interesting. So I don't want to read this whole thing because it's pretty long. Um, if you all want to read it, I'll definitely this will be in the docket. This makes me wonder beyond the girl herself, the woman herself, Zuva. When it comes to black men and the saggy pants, why Paul Bryant, why would a guy buy jeans that are skin tight but then sag them?
Because it's the culture, bro. It's the culture. It doesn't make sense. I can't understand it. I'm told that, Paulie, you have to understand these are the kids, these are the youth. This is what they do. And I understand that, but I look at these kids, these skin tight skinny jeans, but yet they're sagging, showing the all your drawers. Or they're wearing pink. Now you got, boys wearing pink. And
Mhm.
everyone has those braids on their head that looks like a spider is sitting on their head. So I just, it's the culture. It's what the culture is. I understand that. I get that. But you know, so things don't always make sense, Mike.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, so I cannot find any logical reason for why these things are what they are, why they are socially accepted. All I can say is this: they don't make sense. They're illogical. They're non creative, and ultimately they're self destructive because they are reflective of a wider Black American society that is self destructive, non productive, and it is self perpetuating. And that is the food for thought no one wants to eat.
Mhm.
It's just accepted. That's Black American culture, and that's what it is. And we have our own, and everyone wants to copy us. Well, but only things that are non-productive,
Mhm.
things that are things that are illogical, irrational, non-substantive, are what are things that are actually copied. Okay, so one has to ask oneself, what is the driving factor behind that? Okay, coming back to again wider mental illness. So at this point, personally, you know, I moved past beyond it's white America and it's the culture. Fine, get that, understand that. What else you got?
Mhm.
What are you doing about you to change you? Instead of telling me about all these external factors, what are
Mhm.
you doing? How are you getting on with it? So, which again brings me personally back to therapy and mental health because it's a sickness. It is a mental sickness. And that is something that needs to be addressed. So it's comfortable to always point the finger. It's difficult to point that finger in the mirror.
Mhm. Reigning woman, you have anything you want to add to this?
With that, I simply co-sign everything that Paul Bryant has said.
Including the tight jeans?
Well, yes, definitely. Definitely including the tight jeans. I mean, I totally do not get that at all. I don't understand sagging
Right.
at all. It just I don't understand it. Nothing will make me understand a person wanting to a man wanting to show off his buttocks.
See, I understand the slim fit, skinny sort of jeans if you're wearing the right apparel, right? Because there's a fashion movement amongst men called I forget
Metrosexual.
no, not metrosexual. It's a dandy. So there's things called dandy and stuff like that, where guys wear dress up to the nines, no matter how poor they are. They show this in Africa all the time. You have villages of poor people, but you have these guys who dress up as in these designer suits, man. They just walk around and they strut. It's a very interesting thing. But
It is. Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
yeah. But when it comes to the sagging of the skinny jeans, that's the part that really makes me struggle. Why do you have a belt if you're going to wear? Why did you spend all that money on a Louis Vuitton belt if you're going to sag them anyways? I don't understand.
Right.
I don't
It's
understand the con.
Yeah, and walking and having to walking and trying to pull them up at the same time. And a lot of times, I mean, if they're ever chased by something or God forbid they gotta run from the police because they're in the hood or whatever, you can't run and you got your pants at your knees and they're all tight. It's just like it's crazy.
Mhm.
well, see, this is where this is where I, being the person that I am, that is done because the men who dress like that know that they will attract the women who like that. Case in response,
Mm,
why are the women running around with these crazy, uh, running around half naked and
true.
presenting their backside as their best asset? Because the men like it. So it's a
So
mutually
there are really
self.
women that like men showing their buttocks.
I don't know. I don't know about that.
I don't know
Why
about that.
else they don't? I listen. Maybe you don't, and maybe I disagree with it, and Mike, you disagree with it. But women do not generally dress to impress and attract other women. They dress to attract and impress men. Men do not dress to attract and impress other men unless you're gay, which I'm not judging. They generally do it to attract and impress other women. So when you look at the type of women that men like this are with, okay, this only bears out what I just said. They dress like this because the women that they attract find said method of dressing attractive in the first place. Now this has been scientifically studied and proven for decades, if not centuries. So
Mhm.
we're literally not breaking new ground here on that.
Well, I,
Yeah,
I
yeah, Mike.
think No, I think there's a relationship between, or a symbolic relationship between the sagging of the pants and the broken black male and the woman wanting to correct that black male, right? So I think somebody in the chat was just saying that women seem to love these types of men. And I think Paul Bryant just kind of alluded to that. I think these women see these men as something that needs to be fixed, as a fixer-upper, as something to salvage. Whereas a brother who does not have that, they completely ignore him. And I've seen this happen time in memorial in my career, that the brother who has himself together, who doesn't sag, who doesn't do all of that, he gets ignored, and the brother who does do it, he gets surrounded by women. It's a very interesting concept.
Exactly. But now you're right. You're 100%. And that is exactly what I just spoke on. What I would say, just really briefly, because personally, not really my favorite topic of conversation, but
Hmm.
I would say, as I always try to tell, especially the younger men,
Hmm.
if you elevate your thinking and you elevate your circumstances in life, everything else by default will elevate as well. So, for those men who find themselves, for those black men who don't sag and don't wear and pink clothes and have a spider sitting on their head and don't talk like slavery ended yesterday, if you find that the women who you like are not attracted to you because you do not dress like that, because you speak clear, coherent English, and you are of a higher mindset and socioeconomic strata than women who are of a higher socioeconomic strata, they will be attracted to you. So with that said, with all of that said, um, I as I said, I would clearly posit that that is indicative of a self-perpetuating, self-destructive general mindset amongst Black American culture and society as a whole, and it
Hmm.
needs to change. Okay, all is mental because mental is supreme.
Dr. Phoenix, you want to jump in?
Yeah, good evening to everyone.
Good evening.
I was reading, listening to you read through the article. I, in all honesty, um, first thing came to mind just listening to the woman who wrote the article. To me, it just seems like just straight up and down narcissism. Um, and the problem with borderline personality disorder is that there's no definitive way to prove that someone has it.
Hmm.
There's no definitive medical test you can do. There are any definitive medications you can give. Typically, you get a you get a cocktail of medications to treat it. Um, and earlier, I didn't. Earlier, you were talking about just the way some of the black males in the black manosphere behave.
Hmm.
Um, I will argue for all these, including the woman in the article. I will argue that the genesis of their mental health issues really starts in the childhood. I don't think it's just something where you just felt out of place and then no. I honestly believe, and this has typically been true of what I've seen. So let me put that caveat in there. What I've seen is that these folks have had some serious traumatic events that have occurred within their childhood, and multiple traumatic events. I will argue that also too that many black children, and including the ones that are adults, my age included, I will argue that many of them were exposed to environmental factors that cause some neurological damage. So, for example, lead. We know that if you live in that you live in inner city, you live in these big metros, these inner city environments like Chicago, Baltimore, Milwaukee, New York, where lead poisoning was a common issue in areas where black people lived. So, current guidelines from the CDC is about, you generally get tested if a child should be tested around 2 years of age or so for elevated lead levels. Because again, this is how you found out. This is how they found out that the water sources in Flint, Michigan were dirty, was because you had all these children pop. There was a pediatrician started to see all these kids come into her office with, elevated lead levels and a number of neurological issues. And so testing it, then they realized, yeah, it was coming, a lot of it was coming through the water. But the CDC guidelines say that about 5 milligrams per micrograms, per deciliter, anything over that, you should be testing for that. I would argue that most Black children in this day and age are being exposed to levels 4 to 5 times that amount by the time they're 2. And many of them go untested. And what happens is that lead is one of the most poisonous substances to humans on the planet, besides mercury and arsenic. And what the major issue that shows up with someone who has lead poisoning or elevated lead levels is neurological dysfunction. A lot of times they have stunted neurological growth. You see a lot of kids that have very, very young ages that have impulse control issues. And I think because they're not being tested for this at an early age, that this is what you see now. These folks grew from children into adulthood, and you see those same issues that began in childhood that have manifested as adults. And again, if you're coming from many of these environments, and a lot of these folks that I've seen on some of these panels in the Black Manosphere, many of them come from these environments. They come from places like Philadelphia, Baltimore, Chicago, Milwaukee. I mean, Milwaukee, for example, has some of the highest rates of lead poisoning for Black children in the country. I think it might be at the top. And so again, when we consider that you have these environmental exposures that create these neurological disorders, neurological dysfunctions within children, and these neurological dysfunctions go undiagnosed, go unchecked, this grows with you into adulthood. And so when you consider that, and consider the fact that it's very well known that you have about somewhere between 25% to 30% to about a third of black adult age females who are currently being medicated on some form of antipsychotropic, some type of psychotropic medication. So when we it is very well known in the field of neuroscience that the brain does not typically stop growing until about 25. For some people, it can go all the way to 30 years of age. And so if you put a child on something like Adderall or Ritalin or any other psychotropic, you put them on Effexor. This is what you saw with a lot of veterans that were coming back from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan in the very early days of the war. Many of them were being put on antidepressants while they were in theater, which is a no-go. Many of them, you had many children that were being medicated, that were being put on antidepressants at 16 years old. It is very common in this day and age to be, to see a teenager that's on an antidepressant. And again, you're giving antidepressants that are known to be ineffective in people under the age of 25. It is known that they're not effective in people who are under the age of 25, but yet they're given out. Because why? Because again, going back to the whole borderline personality disorder, it's such a subjective disease, if you will. I don't know if I would really call it that, but again, it's such a subjective issue that you need a diagnosis to support why you have to medicate someone. Mm-hmm. So you cannot get a medication. You can never give a medication without a supporting diagnosis. But again, I mean, because there's no real way to test whether or not somebody has borderline personality disorder, I would argue that for these folks in general, I would argue that the issue is not because, maybe you just fell out of place as a teenager or you're adult. I would argue that the vast majority is related to childhood trauma, and most of them just not being honest about it. Most of these women out here that have these issues, because one of the manifestations of borderline personality disorder are body dysmorphic issues. You're not comfortable in your own skin. Women tend to not like their hair. They tend to have these issues with the way they look. They lack the confidence. They can't take rejection. Sounds pretty familiar in the black society, if you ask me. This is pretty much standard operating procedure every day.
Look at black women, and no one who's a woman take this personal or as a shot, but look at black women and their insistence upon putting those, what I call a dirty floor mop on their head. There's no reason for you to be running around with a hair weave on your head. None. But yet, that's probably another topic for another day.
But I mean, this also goes in line with borderline personality disorder, because again, this is something that tends to affect women more so than men. And
would you argue that Malcolm X went through it when he had the conch in his hair?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of it. I think a lot of it is just very much related to not just say, oh well, I have this mental health issue. I think a lot of it is just really just social engineering. It's just social conditioning. You know, and I don't consider social conditioning a mental health disorder, because mental health, when I think of a mental health disorder, I think of somebody that has Alzheimer's or dementia of some kind.
Autism, Asperger's.
Yeah, Asperger's. We don't even use Asperger's. I'm not even gonna tell you guys the story about Asperger's, why it's called that, but only thing I would say about that, look up a Nazi doctor named Dr. Asperger. He was also known as Dr. Death. That's how you got the name Asperger. But
I know. I'm very familiar.
Yeah, he got the name because he was part of the Nazi eugenics program, and he was pretty much the progenitor of it. He was the one that pretty much wrote it for the most part. But
what's the actual term then that we should use instead of using?
It's autism spectrum disorder.
Okay.
They still have the term Asperger's syndrome in many medical texts. When I was in nursing school and stuff like that, they use it there. But for the most part, in many texts, in most of the texts, the name has been stricken out and replaced with autism spectrum disorder. But well, since we're already talking about it, a little quick history on it is that he was called Dr. Death because he killed children. Basically, all the children that Adolf Hitler and the SS deemed as unworthy of carrying on the Aryan bloodline. So blonde hair, blue eyes, pale skin, they were killed. But he didn't kill them. He tortured them. He experimented on them before he killed them. So he would do things like give them IVs of fluorine and stuff like that, give it to them a long time, slowly kill them, torture them. He experimented on them. So yeah, so a lot of the stuff about pediatric populations came from his experimentation.
Now, you say body dysmorphia. What about some of the guys who wear these man buns, and they key up people's cars, as they walk by?
Again, I think this is all symptomatic of social conditioning. I mean, let's just keep this 100, man. How many dudes ever had an ex-girlfriend that she was crazy as hell? She keyed up the car, busted out your windows. I remember when I was a 17-year-old kid, I had this crazy ex-girlfriend, a couple years older than me, bust out my mother's window. I mean, did it twice. I mean, just hella crazy. But the reason I say that is because what we see this kind of behavior being transferred from female to male. So is this really indicative of someone that has, quote, borderline personality disorder, or this is really a social conditioning by virtue of the environment?
Right, but how much of that, at what point it's so socially and culturally ingrained amongst Black people that at what point does it not become some kind of a mental condition?
Here's the interesting thing. If people, I know in the Black Manosphere on YouTube, you got these Kundalini, conscious Negroes, whatever you want to call them. I'm just gonna keep it 100 with you. They all seem to ignore the work of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. She was a board certified, medically trained psychiatrist. She was a psychiatrist by trade.
Yep.
And no one never read her seminal work on the ISIS papers and how she predicted decades ago that black males will go from wearing pants to tight jeans to dresses. And what do we see now?
Yeah,
Exactly that.
the day she died, the Young Thug actually came out on the cover of his album with a dress.
You know, it's ironic because I remember the date when she died a few years ago.
Yep.
I remember it was I don't it was maybe only a couple hours after the word got out that she had passed away, and you literally had like every gay black activist attacking her.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they were all on Facebook, you know, all on YouTube and social media attacking this woman. And basically, I mean, I would, to his credit, you know, Tariq Nasheed, he defended her. He actually paid for a funeral because she was one of his personal mentors. And you know, but again, this is a woman who was well ahead of her time, who saw the social conditioning happening. You know, even Umar Johnson, he talks about this. I know folks feel some kind of way, but I really do support the brother because he's one of the few black people out here that's really telling the truth.
So can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Social and cultural conditioning, you know, which I am 100% in lock, you know, that's you that's my mantra. Okay. So my question then is this. That's why I keep saying the mindsets have to change. So I am not I am not I don't necessarily disagree with you. So I'm not saying that. I'm not a huge proponent of slapping mental illness on people who do not actually have a mental illness. I personally do not believe that there is mass mental health problems. I don't. Those that have mental health problems have them, and those that don't. But as I keep saying, the mindsets need to change. The culture and the general mindset needs to change. So now, how does that begin? Because that's something black people need to do for each other, for themselves. I mean, for themselves, and that's something that has to start internally. How
Yeah,
does that how does that begin?
I mean, again, I mean, I think I've talked about this briefly on a on a panel some time ago, but I talked about if you want to know the state of a society, just look at the state of its women. So we know that women are the teachers of children. They are the ones principally responsible for enculturating children.
The custodians of culture.
Yes, they are the vanguards of a society's values, culture, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if we know that, for example, in the article they talked about this, but I guarantee you, if you could meet this young lady's mother, you would see the exact same person.
Mm-hmm.
I guarantee you will see the exact same person. And again, you know, I'm not offering a diagnosis or nothing like that. That's not what I do. However, just based on my own personal work and experience being out in these communities and working with I work with a lot of brothers, and I would say too, the brothers, the lot of young brothers you see out here, they are reflections of the mothers, not so much the fathers, but really the mothers.
Absolutely.
And
I
again,
agree. Hmm.
and again, I will argue that when it comes to that, yeah, the part of the problem is that, I mean, there were brothers on some of the other panels, Black Guru Strikes. He talked about getting these kids away from these mothers because you gotta understand, these mothers were broken. The number one reason why black females wear weaves is because their mama put it in their hair first. Their mama put it in their hair when they were 2 years old. Their
Right.
mom was putting perms in their hair when they were 3 years old. Umar Johnson's been talking about this for years. That's why he always talks about when he gets in school. Yeah, got to keep the mamas away. Why? Because he knows they broken.
Yeah, I see several African countries this year instituting that in order to work within the government, you have to wear your hair natural.
Yeah, man. There was a brother in the chat earlier that said that they the skinny jeans would just not come out. Man, when I was in Africa and Europe over a decade ago, man, the African brothers over in Europe and Africa are already wearing the skinny jeans, man.
Exactly.
Brothers here in the U.S. that weren't wearing it about a decade or so ago.
Right.
They were already wearing it over there decades
I,
ago. I mean that Africa is very Europeanized, you know. And if you go to these European countries, you meet the brothers over there, you can they just brothers who wear skinny jeans that try to rap. No
Yeah,
offense to
with a
them,
thick
but
accent, with a thick accent.
exactly. But I say that to say, if you really, if we really want to know the genesis of how these mental health disorders begin, one, you do have to look at the environment. You have to look at where most of the kids are growing up in poverty, growing up in areas that have been redlined. I mean, again, and I would challenge anyone in the chat on the panel, if you just did the research on your own, look at the areas that were redlined, and then look at where you see the highest cluster, and look at where you see the clusters, the clusters of lead poisoning.
Mhm.
I would challenge anybody to tell me you won't see a correlation.
Would you also say that the carbon dioxide from the vehicles in those environments, such as
Yeah, it's funny.
trucks?
It's funny because this was the principal way lead got into humans. Did not come through the lead, did not come through the white paint on the walls. It was actually through car emissions.
from the
Up,
catalytic
yeah,
converter.
it was catalytic converters, but specifically you had leaded gasoline, and they stopped putting lead in gasoline in the mid '90s. I think it was Bush Senior that finally, him and Congress finally worked together to pass the law to stop the sale of leaded gasoline because
No, actually, it was the 70s.
was the '70s.
The
Yeah.
I thought it was officially it officially ended in the early mid '90s. I thought
No, it was 1976.
okay, yeah, but if you look at the numbers, if you there was a lot of there's been a number of studies that came out that showed that when they started putting lead in gasoline, everybody know because of the anti-knock properties of lead and all that stuff. But the original engineers that worked on it, many of them died because of exposure to lead. Many of them ended up with a number of neurological issues because of their exposure to lead
Hmm.
and stuff like that. And so when we understand how black communities, black neighborhoods have been bisected by interstates and highways and such like that, again, the major sources of pollution isn't necessarily, because you're by a power plant, but it's really because mostly pretty much every single black area in this country, you pick the city, has been bisected by a major thoroughway. And so when you juxtapose that against lead line, walls, white paint, lead white paint with lead in it, um, asbestos and all these other environmental exposures that a lot of the Gen Xers and baby boomers were exposed to eventually got passed on in the children, in the offspring.
Yeah.
And because they lived in those same areas, in those same neighborhoods, same buildings, the projects, the housing projects, you pick it, the New York, Baltimore, Chicago was infamous. I mean, the whole State Street of Chicago was infamous because you had literally like 5 miles of housing projects. I mean, everybody watched, folks that it was before my time, but folks watched Good Times. That was the Cabrini Green projects in Chicago. You go over there now, it's no longer there. It's all gentrified, and they got one of the best high schools in the nation sitting right there where the Cabrini Green projects were.
With
But
the Olympic track and swimming pool.
mm-hmm. and but the point is that you had all these different environmental sources that became sources of environmental contaminants and pollutants that black folks were redlined into, and so eventually those environmental exposures got to them, also got into the children, and subsequently I think many of these children went undiagnosed, went untreated, and they grew into adulthood. And so that's what you're seeing now playing out on, whether it's everyday life if you're out on the streets, or what you're seeing playing out on Black YouTube.
Now, would you say that what do you call it? Some of these black men on these panels, you better not be talking about no black woman. You better not be doing this. Better not be doing that. You hear these guys. You hear they go from hot to cold. As one of the articles pointed out, and it's very strange. They're willing to jump out the window for somebody that's not willing to walk out the door for them. Would you say that's indicative as well?
Yeah, I mean, again, this goes back to how were they cultured. I mean, we see this all the time. You know, you pick the scenario. We see these young men that are, you know, they get D1 scholarships, they get drafted into the NBA, to the NFL, and who do you see right next to them? That that damn mammy of theirs that could never get their father to stick around, could never get no man to stick around, could never get a man to do anything for them, but they got that son to be the man that they can never attract themselves.
So how does that? Oh, so you're saying that the sun is a byproduct of that, and what you see now on black.
That what I'm saying is that they see their mothers in these women, these these males. Oh, and I in all honesty, as much as I say it's the young dudes, I gotta say it's probably a lot of these middle. I see as a lot of it are these middle aged and older dudes. It's their mamas. You
Let
gotta
me
understand a
ask
lot
you a
of these
question.
cats that were Gen Xers. A lot of them grew up in the crack cocaine epidemic. So your mama was probably a crackhead. Your aunt was a crackhead, most likely. Maybe your grandmother, maybe your
So,
father, and that's what
so,
they see. It's
so,
redemption.
so, can I ask you a question? Because, excuse me, personally, clearly, we are fully aware of all these environmental factors, fully, fully aware. But the culture and the society that has to change.
I would say that's at the
Where is
core
the
of what's
focus
happening.
on that?
Yes, I would think a
Okay,
lot of the issues that are being propagated are very much related to social, societal conditioning and culture.
because
I would certainly say that that is probably the most likely culprit. I Because again, mental health is very subjective. It's very hard to prove. It's not like someone has like dementia or or if you're dealing with someone that's even older because they might have delirium because they have some other pathology going on, and you fix that underlying pathology, you get rid of the delirium. But you know, there's a clear diagnosis, there's a clear testing for delirium. I mean, not delirium, excuse me, Alzheimer's, dementia, MS. We all know that late stage cancers, especially ones that metastasize to the brain, into the
so
meninges, they
so
can cause a number of mental health issues. But again, those folks generally aren't really the issue. But we understand there's a clear definitive way of defining that.
is it possible, or because clearly environmental conditions have to change, cultural and social conditions have to change. Is this a case of is this a case of tackling one issue before the other, or is it a case of tackling both? Because the reason why I ask that, I've heard the changing of the environmental factors. I've heard that argument for decades. I never hear anyone addressing changing the mindsets. So, changing the mindset and the culture will then allow people to possibly change their environment. Kind of the case of, listen, give a man a fish and he'll eat for one day, but teach that man how to fish and he will feed himself for the rest of his life. So that's why I'm asking, what do you, as a clinician, what are your views on tackling the cultural and social aspect?
I'm of the belief that Dr. Frances Cress Wilson was. I mean, she talked about mental health illness, but a lot of her work was really dealing with social conditioning.
Mhm.
It was her who gave black people the term white supremacy. There's a very infamous debate she did against the white physicist, was his name William Shockley, I believe that was his name.
Yep.
And but very infamous debate she did against him in the 70s. And this woman was brilliant. I mean, again, we're dealing with social conditioning. I don't really wholesale believe there's really this. I don't want to, again, I got to be careful here, but I don't want to say there isn't mental illness, but at the same time, I know that the underlying from my just subjective analysis of this, the underlying issue is related to social cultural conditioning.
Mhm.
Because again, I mean, how many folks have you all ever known, the on the panel, in the chat, how many people have you known that was on some type of antidepressant, they never got better? How many children have you known that were on Ritalin or Adderall, never got better? And I will argue with you, they will almost never get better. I've never seen a scenario where a child was on Ritalin, Adderall, they got better. But I can show you a lot of studies that highlight that not only will they not get better, they will get worse. And giving children things like Adderall, Ritalin, antipsychotics, antidepressants can cause other physiological problems. We know something called gynecomastia, which is the growth of breasts in males, can be caused by giving black boys Ritalin.
Really?
Man boobs. Yeah,
Really?
Yes, yes.
I
I've
thought that came
I've
from
read those
Freud, though.
studies.
No, it can cause, there's studies that have demonstrated that, yeah, it could potentially be a side effect of giving boys stuff like Ritalin.
So they lactate as well?
I don't know about lactate, but I would say that, yeah, they can develop, men, if you will, male female breasts, if you will. You can see the development of that in boys potentially if they've been given Ritalin. Yeah, I mean,
Man boobs.
yeah, I mean, if you just if you look at some of the standard antidepressants, psychotropic meds, Adderall, Ritalin, understand something. These medications are only slightly different than something like heroin or crack cocaine.
Mm.
I mean, chemically very similar, but also too, we know, why would you give such a powerful man to a developing body?
Mhm.
Why would you do that? Where it could potentially change the brain chemistry. It can alter other chemistry within the body. It can alter metabolic processes within the body.
Well, I personally would argue that actually leads to a deeper conversation about the AMA and the FDC and those and the unhealthy relationship between the drug companies and the wealthy elite who make money off of both. But
You mean
at the
you
end of
mean
the day,
did you mean FDA or FDC?
I'm sorry, the FDA. I'm sorry.
Thought you meant the Federal Drug
Yeah,
Cartel.
here's the thing
Yeah,
about the drug.
that
Here's the
too.
thing about big pharma and drug companies and the AMA, and I mean, look, basically since the early 1900s, big pharma has been putting representatives in all medical schools. So basically, their board of trustees, whatever, generally has someone from big pharma sent on there that guides the curriculum taught to medical students.
Mhm.
That helps to design the curriculum taught to medical students. Again, it is, I mean, you don't need to be a clinician, you don't need to be a physician or a nurse or whatever the case may be to understand that everybody, I'm pretty sure everyone on this panel, in the chat, has known someone that has been on an antidepressant, may have known a child that may have been on something like Ritalin or Adderall, and did they ever get better?
Mm.
Did they ever get better?
Mhm.
And again, you typically couple that with psychotherapy.
Right.
And
Right.
again, the purpose of psychotherapy isn't to, you don't want to say cure. You can't say cure because AMA owns it.
Cope.
Yeah,
It's it's
that's the key word.
it's
Cope.
to cope. It's to learn. It's to learn the tools that allow you to cope so you can live a better and more stable life. Okay, so
Exactly.
it is not about drugs, it's not about medicating, it's about helping a person cope. Because if you truly do have mental illness, and there are some who do, the goal for them is learning better ways to live and cope. So for those
Uh-huh.
that
I
do,
would agree with that because I will also add, like, things like, let's say PTSD.
mhm,
You know, been called a number of things throughout the decades: shell shock, whatever, Gulf War syndrome, whatever. But PTSD is not just something indicative of veterans. I can personally speak to that because I've gone through the whole battery of tests to get tested for all of that. But I've known pretty much every veteran goes through this. Period. But I know women who were rape victims also develop PTSD. Very common. Many of them also develop some form of bipolar disorder because of sexual assault. So there are legitimate things that we know that can cause mental illness. We know that traumatic events potentially can cause mental illness. Now, the problem with borderline personality disorder, even though there is research that suggests that there is a genetic component, certainly there's an environmental factors involved. The problem is that it's so subjective. There's no official way to medicate it. You will find no protocol that will show you how to medically treat borderline personality disorder.
Go ahead, Paul.
So, what are your thoughts on? What are your views on mindsets being passed from generation to generation to generation and changing of culture in general? What are your thoughts on going about how an individual can begin to change the culture and the mindset of himself personally and his family? At least start there, because I don't think you can tackle this whole Black American thing, by yourself. But if one person starts, and then his family starts, and then so on and so forth. What are your what do you think about that? Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. Were you asking me or Mike?
You, Doc.
Oh, okay. I do think. As much as Black folks like to avoid these terms, accountability, cultural responsibility, it's still very true. Again, the part of the reason we're getting our asses kicked in just about every industry is because we have not conditioned our boys, for example, to be industrialists. They cannot go out here and compete in a 21st century economy where it is driven by knowledge and knowledge discovery and skills. They can't compete. Most of them can't compete on that level. And that in turn causes issues in of itself.
Isn't the Manosphere in industry in itself? I mean, YouTube.
I think if you're dabbling in gutter trash, Jerry Springer style YouTube via YouTube, I mean, fine. I mean that's just my personal opinion on it. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of brothers within the Black Manosphere, very intelligent brothers. But again, when your whole goal is to make money, there's really no morality involved. If you're willing to make money by any means necessary, and I'm not gonna knock the hustle or whatever, but if that is your goal, what Black people need to be discerning about is how do you distinguish between what's real, what's in your best interest, and what isn't.
But then you have what would you know what? Let me stay away from that rabbit hole for 1 second. But so
I will respond to Rainy Woman.
She's on the panel.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry because I saw her what she put up in. I'm not saying that people who come from poor social conditions. I'm telling you as a gentleman who came from a single mother. I talked to Paul Bryant about this offline. I come from a single mother, but again, how did I get to where I got? Because you know why? I joined the military. I was 19 years old, and I was sent in Iraq at 19 years old, getting put in charge of medical services for EOD, flying around on Black Hawks. I'm going all through Iraq at 19 years old, and people actually depended on me to know how to do my damn job and save their life. And that's a lot of responsibility put on a 19-year-old kid running around with morphine and all kinds of medications.
So, you know,
That's the difference. The difference is that, do you have the fortitude? Because I don't buy this notion that not one person cannot look around and see something is not horribly wrong with how we function. I
but
don't buy
see,
it.
but that goes against the typical American Black narrative. That goes against what you just said, which I am lockstep agreement in. That goes against the typical American Black narrative. Everything is all right. The culture is great. Blame Whitey. Well, take some accountability at this point. Look in the mirror, even with all of the environmental conditions, and no one is denying that. But at what point do you look in the mirror and, one, admit there is a problem, two, admit there is a problem with you, and three, go about changing that problem on your own, and take the chip off the shoulder and look at yourself and do what you have to do. Just get on with it. Go about the business of creating the reality that you want to see. But see, that runs so afoul and so counter of the typical American Black narrative. It's almost as if a cognitive dissonance takes hold, and any Black person who espouses that line of thinking, they have to be attacked. They have to be vilified.
Hey, Paul.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. What's up, guys? I'd like to ask a question
What's going on,
Yes,
to
brother?
you. What do you think the biggest problem is amongst Black Americans to grab accountability? It seems like, everyone talks that Blacks are so fucked up or whatever. What do you think the big problem is? What's your view on what is our problem?
I don't think that's a easy, simple answer, but to answer your question as directly as possible, um, as I said, I think that a lot of self-perpetuating mindsets have to change. I think that once it is changing the self-perpetuating mindsets and self-perpetuating cultures will allow a lot of people to then change themselves, elevate their thinking, and change their reality around them. Because as easy as it is to, you can always start with yourself. You have to start with yourself before you can start any with anything external of yourself. So it is easy to, in a polite society, you do not blame a victim. So once you are told that you are a victim, there is no accountability for any of your actions. So it is very easy to say, I'm a victim, I don't have to do anything, everything is external of me. So at no point have I ever or will I ever say that there are not external issues. There are systemic problems and issues. I would just posit that individuals should also look at themselves and say, you know what? There are problems internally, there are problems externally of me. So let me control what I have direct control over, which is myself, and change myself. And then I can begin to tackle everything external of me. So that's as close as an answer. I don't think that I can say there is one big thing or there is one big problem. There are a multitude of issues.
So you would say it's definitely more on an individual account than on a collective account.
I think that if the goal is for a person to change their circumstance and elevate their situation in life, that has to start from within. You have to begin with yourself. You have to create the reality that you wish to see, but that has to start with yourself first. So if
Go ahead.
if a door is closed, and if there is a barrier in front of that door, you have to first do what you can to remove the barrier. You have to do what you have to do to open that door. Just saying that there's a barrier there and there was a door closed isn't enough. Just to recognize it isn't enough. What are you doing about yourself to put yourself in a situation?
Only reason why I bring this up is I see quite a few of us individual blacks doing well, but I see the collective enterprise-wide game for us not so good. And the disconnect between the individual and the kind of group is there. And we're castigated as a group and dealt with pretty savagely as a group. But yet we preach hardcore individualism. Where is the nexus between the group and the individual? Where is that? And I think, and the reason why I talk about that is when I see other ethnicities that are doing very well, they have individual, they have, they do look at things definitely individually. But I see them operate effectively as a group. And I look at Jews and others, and you can't attack them. I'll talk Jews specifically. Can't attack them. You attack them, you're going to feel their wrath, whether it's a low end or a high end Jewish person. You attack them, there's going to be a problem. That's how they roll. Where's our nexus? Where is that? That's a question that I ask.
Well, I think that, and I think I understand, really understand what you're trying to convey, because it is somewhat of an issue that I've struggled with myself over many years. So I would say that in order for there to be a collective, it has to start on an individual basis first, because a collective is made up of individuals. So if the individuals that make up the collective are not of the proper mindset, how can there ever be a high functioning collective in the first place?
I think so much of our issues deal with many of us who consider ourselves to be well educated and so many and all of this. Many of us who are in this group, and I'll claim some guilt of this as well. But many of us, we talk that individual game and that group game, but we ain't down with the group, man. We want the rights of the honorary white man. We want to be separated, and to a large extent, that leaves us and others relatively unprotected, and I think that slips between our fingers a lot of the time. I don't think we think about that as much. And the more and more I look at this, clearer and clearer and clearer this becomes. Just with these shootings and so forth as well. Just even though they're small terms, but here are people ganging up to blow your ass away. And you got these Latinos sitting here saying, "Oh, I want to be the white man. I want that." And they're getting literally the fucking the salsa blown out of them. And then we're looking at ourselves. We want to be that honorary white man. And some issues here with that. I think this is something that we all have to sit down and think about.
I do agree with you, brother. I do agree with you. I really do. But I'm talking as a I'm gonna speak from my experience as someone who joined the military at a very young age and saw exactly how the military is able to function as well as it does. I mean, there is no room for dissension in the military. I mean, I will never forget all throughout my training, I was always told individuality is the enemy of discipline. You cannot have a bunch of individuals running around and then think that you're going to be led into war and think that this person is going to be your 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 battle buddy, and they're going to watch your back and make sure you don't get blown away in some foreign land. I mean, and let's just keep it real here, man. On Black YouTube, like I said, I haven't been in this sector for a few months, and I came across you brothers because I had listened to, one of he's considered the person that started the Black Manosphere, and he mentioned you brothers over at the Black Brain Trust, and I had heard of you before, Nago. I'll be, in all fairness, I've heard of you long before that. It sounds like you've been on YouTube, you've been in these circles for a while. But I would say that it's become very clear to me over the last 2-3 months or so that people are really driven by self-motivation. Again, the brothers here at the Black Brain Trust have had talks about, if you're not coming through these certain sectors of Black YouTube, you ain't that dude, you ain't validated. And again, that's kind of sort of that individual cliquey mindset that happens in Black society. This goes back to some of the first, on some of the first panels I was on, where I talked about why black college students don't do well in college. This is exactly why. You cannot get in a room with another black person, let alone another Black student. You and this person sending organic chemistry together, and you won't even look at each other. And so again, we would rather, in many instances, in my humble opinion, I feel that we would rather cut off our noses just to spite everyone else. We would rather sit here and fail as a group instead of sitting here saying, okay, we need to do, what is it that we need to do? And I spend my time trying to work with a lot of younger brothers, because I've made mistakes in my life. And had I done things a little bit better, I would have been down this road a few years ago and not now. But again, I spend my time, my personal time, trying to get coalescing, getting younger brothers to understand, where are the opportunities at in this world, and how you need to get with other brothers, and you all go through nursing, or you go through PA or medical school, or whatever the case may be. You go through it together, and you all be each other's support.
You see,
and
you
change
I just want to say
differently, and that's all I've ever said. Is just,
Yeah, and I understand. There's my whole point in this is that there's only the part I can do, brother. There's only the part that I can do, and I try to do that. And again, I even go back to previous interviews I've heard years ago with Umar Johnson, where he talked about, like, yeah, he can't even deal with the adults. That's why he focuses on children, because they're done. Most of them are done. You really can't do anything for these folks. And I know it sounds cruel and whatever, but I mean, it is what it is. And like I said, just kind of going back through if you go back to the article that the brother Mike V was reading through, I couldn't. Do you know how many females I know like this with MDs and RNs behind their name, man? I know tons of women like this, and I would argue, hell, shit, most of the people in the medical field probably medicated on some damn antidepressant in the first damn place. If you want me to be honest.
Only reason why I bring this up, because I can't, I just, there's some books I read over and over again, and I keep reading that Sun Tzu, L'art de guerre, the art of war. I keep reading that, and there's no doubt in my mind we are at war, been at war in this country a very long time, low intensity warfare, if you will. Terrorism and so forth being brought down our community for a very long time. But one of the things that he constantly talks about, he talks about a father and son army, and how, when that army is harmonized and victorious policies are initiated, that father and son army can now move forward, rest itself upon the hill, and now be prepared to do what needs to be done. How you take out a very strong nation is to separate each quadrant, make it fight for itself, and therefore internally you can rout them. And they could be a very powerful army. They could be moving as majestic as mountains, as they say, you know. But yet, you know, you can divide them. You can divide them. And when you divide them internally and make each section, because they're so arrogant and think they're so live like that they can fight for themselves, you can then deal with each individually. Where you're concentrated, they're divided. Where you're concentrated and when they're divided, you have power. And you can do a great degree of damage. You can rout them. You can beat them. So now here's this very powerful, powerful state that looks almost undefeatable, being defeated. And I looked at our community, and I look at it very much the same way. We have, with our Black moralists, at least we have an arrogance problem. With our underclass people, if you will, they have an anger, hatred, hating on you problem. So therefore, moving as a unified kind of group, as a majestic mountain moving throughout the streets, which would be a horrifying sight to see for your enemy. We can never gain that because we have too many issues dividing us. And I look here just on Black YouTube alone, just the inanity and the craziness that I see. That is absolute insanity. But yet we call ourselves a group, but yet here we are going against each other, left, right, and center. White supremacists are gunning you down. You haven't doxed one white supremacist. You haven't sat back and taken one of them out. But yet you're talking about everybody else and taking everyone. I sit back and look at it and I say, this is.
Can I ask you a question?
This is it's almost mental retardation. It's frightening, and I'm just bringing up some points as to the biggest issue, and I see, and it's something that Paul brings up. And he talks about, our mindset, and I don't know if we're ever going to get to that point. I don't know if we're ever going to get there. If we ever do, I think things will change. But the individualistic mindset we do have, I see, is a deleterious, defeated policy. That's not a winning policy, and I think we have to adopt victorious policies in order for us collectively to do better, because individually it's not working. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, brother. I agree with everything you said. The only thing I would add to that is that, again, in my humble opinion, based on what I've seen, the vast majority of us lose the battle before we walk out our home in the morning.
Well, I mean, all that's easy to say. How can I help to get that individual's mind more right to walk out in the morning and deal?
I'm telling you.
I think that's our battle. I mean, I don't disagree with you.
No.
You ain't gonna get me to disagree with you.
No. I'm not saying that at all, brother. I'm just telling you, just my personal experience, especially being in healthcare. I'm telling you, man, it is, one of the hardest times I have is trying to get brothers to do basic wellness exams. I almost never give out my personal information, contact information, but I've given a number of brothers my personal contact information over the last 3 years or so.
Yeah, I think you mentioned. I think I've heard you mention something like that before.
Yeah,
I believe I
kid you not, brother. No matter how much I can plug these brothers into a network, if they don't have a medical home, they don't have a primary care provider, I can plug them in. I can give them to see folks practically for free. And I kid you not, it is the worst damn struggle I have. It's to the point, brother, I wouldn't even, I'm
fear. Fear. There's a lot of fear involved. There's a lot of fear there, and that's ignorance.
It is fear, brother. But the problem is, and I think this is very true. At least being in the being in the Black YouTube sector, and specifically in the Black Manosphere, it's a lot of the older brothers, man. They are the ones that I noticed that have keep a lot of this crap going. A lot of this garbage and this detritus you see out here. Ironically enough, it's the younger brothers that are actually talking with some damn sense and not the older dudes.
It's the culture, bro. It's culture, and culture is a reflection of mindset, and mindset creates culture. Culture creates mindset. It becomes a self-perpetuating cycle of failure. And all that I have ever said, at what point will a Black person or a Black people start to look at doing something different? Change the mindset, change your approach, change your viewpoint, change your perspective. Because whatever has been done to this point, it's not working. And I would argue all the people that point to civil rights and everything else and housing, bro, you're now, Black people now occupy third class status if you're unaware. So all I'm saying look at the mindset.
I would say civil rights and these kind of things. When we fought the hardest, we were kind of at our best. What we did was we got up off the gas.
Let me clarify.
We got up off the gas pedal.
Yes.
And it's tough. It's tough to stay on the gas pedal all the time. I understand that.
Right.
No, I agree with you, brother Nagon. I agree
100%. Your Black Panthers back then were your 18, 19, 20 something year olds. They weren't in their 40s and 50s. They were actually relatively young.
And many of them were military veterans.
Okay, if you look at any revolution, it tends to be led more or less by the middle class, and its shock troops are the young. But the older people are the ones who tend to help to finance it and tend to help to try in many ways to help to guide it in some ways. But the young people are your shock troops, man. Those are the guys. Those are the folks that are hitting them front lines. We certainly saw that in the French Revolution. We certainly saw that, in the American Revolution and so forth. We've in almost any revolution that you've seen throughout history. This is what we see. Even some of the Arabic revolutions that we're seeing there in the Middle East. Qaeda and these groups it's a middle class movement. Middle class educated movement. With many of the young people, the dynamic people as the shock troops. So yes, the young are critical. I am disturbed a little bit when I see on YouTube some of the people in my age group who are in their 40s and 50s hating on the younger brothers in their 20s and 30s. I find that disturbing.
I mean, we were talking about apathy.
And I believe that we are a bit of a microcosm in some respects. So I certainly think that we should do better. And one thing I've seen just is being a grown man doing the things I'm doing, and having much great, fairly significant age difference over a lot of these guys. I can talk about when I was back in junior high school and all that, 40, 45 years ago. I can go back there when most of these guys weren't even born. Graduated out of college, in the early 80s and this kind of stuff. So, different type of deal, but yet I understand only you get greater patience you have to have. And I think that's part of the issue. So many of us, because Black men, to some degree, with the older Black men, we have been affected by a certain degree of powerlessness. We want to be respected as OGs and everything else like this, and we demand people to respect you. And that's you're not gonna get it like that. It doesn't work that way. And I see some of us who are flawed in character push that a great deal. I see it here on YouTube, and I definitely see it out there in the streets as well. But
go ahead, Dr. Phoenix.
We have to get better than that.
Back to the example Nagon gave of Sun Tzu and talking about the father-son army. I mean, if you look at your typical culture, military service is mandatory. If you go to Israel, you're enlisting in the Israeli army.
Yeah,
You know,
that's mandatory.
You
Same
go
thing
to
in Taiwan.
you go to South Korea, same thing. China, same thing. I mean, we see this, and my question is, for the average black father out here who is involved in his son's life, what do you put in his hand? And I can tell you what I see. What I see is typically they put a football or a basketball in that child's hand.
Instead of a book.
I mean, listen. I think sports and all that is great. I think kids have to be balanced. So I don't have a problem with a football or basketball, but they should have books in there as well. It's got to be balanced. I mean, I'm an avid believer in sports, and because I think it teaches a tremendous amount of lessons, and teamwork, team play is critical because these are almost kind of metaphors for an army in many respects. If you ever played football, like I did, played at a fairly high level, and was a head cracking bastard, I can tell you this right now. At the end of the day, it's war out there. And it's the next guy that's next to you that's going to help hit the next team the hardest. Whoever hits the hardest makes the other team want to quit. That's your winner. So that's that. So I think there's a lot of good lessons to be learned from that, because football, in fact, as it developed here in this country, was actually where corporate America actually developed its corporate leadership from, literally from that game.
Yeah.
So I think sports is great, but we have to balance that academics as well. And
therein lies the problem.
And we have to develop a culture. We have to develop a better culture for really harmonizing ourselves. And then I think that's the key point I'm breaking down here right now. That's what I'm talking about. But you guys are filling in on that quite well as well. But anyway, go ahead.
I was saying that therein, I mean, what you highlighted right there is the crux of the issue. There is an imbalance. I mean, your typical teenage black male has aspirations of being an athlete of some kind, an entertainer of some kind. And you would think, given the ones that did have their fathers in their lives, that their fathers, would have gave them some real game and told them the truth about the world that they're about to walk into. Because the 18-year-old brothers that I mentor, the ones that I'm helping to get scholarships and all this stuff, they ain't been taught this stuff.
And I want to say this, we've had a community breakdown, because it didn't just used to be, back in the old days, you had a community raising you. So if you didn't have a father, there were a lot of other men around who you could ultimately look at as someone who could be kind of like a father figure, another male out there that could really show you where it was. That could be out there in the sports. It could be out there, at the barbershop or whatever. There were a lot of, I'm just throwing that as an example, definitely in your school with your teachers and so forth. But generally in your community, moving around, you had a lot of that going on. That has been adversely affected. So I think your community. So I know we talk about fathers and all that, which I think is because I know that we are better fathers than what the media has put out there for us. But yet I look at our community on the whole, and that grouping, that group of men together, even men who didn't have dads, but yet they still had other father type figures around. That was a big part of our community. That was a big part of it. So I think community plays a big role in raising, our children, young boys, and women as well. But certainly men. And I believe that so much of the community aspect and that individual type of, but I'm out here. I got but I'm out though, kind of deal.
I think if we bring this back full circle,
is what has some.
That is a very good point that you make, and the family structure is non-existent. The community mindset is non-existent. So bringing it back to mindset and culture, look at what is celebrated in amongst Black culture. sports, entertainment, and drug dealers and materialism. Things that have zero substance, that will not prepare you for the corporate work environment. Certainly will not prepare you for the fourth industrial revolution, which are the STEM fields. Will not even discipline and self-control and mental and emotional control, interpersonal skills, which will allow you to enter into the workforce at anything higher than a basic menial level. These are all skills and traits and qualities that are, if we're being intellectually honest, are not celebrated and pushed amongst Black American culture and society as a whole. So all of these things are lacking. So I again raise the point and ask the question:
I
when
don't know,
will these things
Paul.
be brought back wholesale?
Paul, I don't know. I don't agree. I'm sorry. I disagree that Black people don't want to do well in school and all this, and that we don't push that. The history, when we look at the history, that's not what we see. We actually see something quite a bit different. We do see a tremendous move towards education. We do, and we see it even today in so many ways, where you do have, people talking about Black women, most well educated, and a lot of people are fighting against that, fair enough. But we haven't talked about how Black males have gone more to college, then of course to the jail, than what they've said, and that Black men are at a level where we're outstripping, from a percentage level, of white men going to college. So, that fact is very well hidden. Now, of course, Jenks Morton and his whole crew with their What Black Men Think and Hoodwink and all that, they came out and really just blew the doors off of these venal lies. Began to really, elucidate upon this a lot more. So I think some of this narrative is false.
And when I travel around New York,
I think we have to push it.
I don't see that though, bro.
Well, I tell you what,
see that.
Maybe we should deal and roll over to the school zone over there with Jeffrey Canada and their crew. Maybe we should go over to Thurgood Marshall High School. Take a look over that.
I would agree with that to an extent
as well, because quite frankly, that's you're seeing a different game. What I see that's really,
but that's only one school.
It's not only it's there's a few of them. In Mount Vernon, also with why am I forgetting this brother's name? It's right off from Gramerton Avenue, kicking ass. Why am I forgetting his name? I'm sorry, I remember.
I am glad to see that, but they seem. But
just let me finish up.
I'm sorry.
I'm just saying that we've got some institutional affects in our community, where we haven't had a tax base. We haven't developed the school systems the way even though we created the public school system, we haven't developed it to a level where it's efficiently operating for us. And a lot of that has been on us. And a lot of that has been on some of the upper crust people. You're supposed to be our educators and so forth. I saw one woman on a radio program talking about education, and she said, I just need to reiterate. And she's talking about reiterate, and and she's head of like the Teachers Association of town.
Wow.
Reiterate. So wow. Reiterate. So I was like, reiterate. Had to say black as the berry, sweet as the juice, that type of thing. Wow. So we have to, we got some cleanup to do at the so-called educated middle level as well. We need to deal with that. And when I say to harmonize and really get together, we have to kind of get real about some things here.
No, I agree.
We need to close down. So
anyway, I'm sorry.
If your closing thoughts.
Yeah, I was just saying with this. I agree with a lot of what Brother Nagone just said. My only the problem with that is that I don't think we truly understand just the numbers of black males that are getting locked up. I mean, when you really look at some of these numbers, the numbers are pretty damn frightening. However, I will say yes, there are, as a whole, do I believe black folks want to be better? Of course they do. I mean, and I think this is especially true of black males when they are given resources, and I have personally seen this when they are giving the opportunity and resources, um, they do well. In fact, they do better than black females. Um, However, again, I think part of the problem is that for many of them, some of them are just have some serious psychosocial issues going on that it would be there'd be a very that'd be a very tough sell for a lot of folks who would be willing to come in and devote a significant amount of time to doing that. In relation to the topic as a whole, again, borderline personality disorder is one of those things, very subjective. Again, there's no real treatment modality for it. There's no real medication protocol for it. I mean, it's typically treated with a cocktail of medications and psychotherapy, such like that. However, going back to the article that Brother Mike was reading earlier, I mean, if you read in between the lines and listen to what this young lady wrote, this sounds like pretty standard behavior in black society. So, I'll just leave it at that.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, I definitely I like to hear the schools such as the one that Nagone was speaking about. I just, from everything that I see, that is not the rule. I won't even say the exception. I will say that it is dwarfed in number by schools that are drastically underperforming. I think that we definitely need to see more of the schools that Nagone spoke on. That needs to be a focus. That should be a focus. That has to be a focus. They are few and far in between. They are not the norm. They need to be the norm. They should be the norm. And when I speak to educators and I speak even to parents of children who do well, and they say that they would like to see more schools like that. Um, I sent my daughter, as I said, I sent my daughter to a Montessori school. I sent my daughter to a private school, and then I sent her to a Upper West Side Manhattan prep school. For those who do not have the resources that I had available to me, there is no reason why you need parents who have a high income to send them to a school where they can get the best education possible. And we absolutely need more of that. And so that's one of the keys, in my opinion, to changing the mindsets, which will change the culture, which will change the mindset, because mindsets have to change. And if mindsets do not change, I don't see as a whole Black American culture and society changing.
Yeah, I would just quickly say, just breaking this whole thing down and looking at it as I do, just get back to the fundamentals. And I will say it's like a broken record. Man, we got to hang together. We got to find a way to hang together here, man. We got to do that. And I think we do that. It will be, I know everybody's up with this glorious, coming together. I think it's a practical type of thing because, it will increase your economic power. It will increase your political power, spiritual power as well, everything, sexual power, however you want to break it down. It'll affect all of that. And I think we need to, kind of look at that, look into that a little bit more. I see other groups practicing this, and they don't all love each other, but they do practice this. I'm gonna continue to say that. I'm not coming off of this coming off of this stump. I'm just not. This is just what we have to do. And I think as things begin to heat up more in this country, as things might get a little worse, and we're going to see more. I think we're going to see some more attacks. I think we're going to see more people who are going to be very tight because this culture is designed to keep people separated and at each other's throats. The ones who are capable of seeing through some of this and really coalescing more so than others are going to be the ones who are going to be more successful. And I would just think I don't think we're going to have much choice in this. So that's what I have to say here.
Reigning woman, you have any closing thoughts?
Yes. First of all, I want to say this is a great discussion. I'm sure we could talk forever and ever and do some more of this. I also want to say I appreciate everyone's contribution in the chat room as well as on the panel. And also, I am a huge believer in women supporting each other and helping each other to be better. So, if you're listening to this playback or listen to the stream and you're a woman and you have some things that you would like to address, or as far as mental or emotional issues, and you feel like you can use some support, you can email me at reigningwoman at REIGNING.WOMBAN Also, I do have some experience in the mental health field, and anything that you share with me or be discussed will be strictly confidential. But I'm open and supportive.
All right, thank you for that. All right, please hit the like button if you have not already done so. Share the video if possible. Hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust. And we'll be back tomorrow with geopolitics. So to everyone else, adios de mañana.
Appreciate it, brother.
Good
Travel safe,
night.
everyone.
Boa noite para todos. Eu falarei com você amanhã. Tchau.
Nice.
Yes, thank you.